People, hope you're well. Welcome to today's, I was gonna say lecture. Welcome to today's vlog. I basically asked on Instagram a few questions. Basically, just said I'm doing a YouTube Q&A. Give me some questions to answer, and we have basically 10 to go through whilst you watch me train. How fantastic! Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. So, I'm actually going to see the quality of this, by the way, because I'm working from my Mac webcam instead of my camera, and let me know if this is decent, because if it is, then I'll basically run it off there. It's actually much easier. So anyway, what intensifiers do you recommend, Jack? So you'll actually see in this one actually the adductor machine that I actually do a cluster set. So right now there's some cool literature coming out on cluster sets. Reps I also recommend, and drop sets. They're mainly the three that I would recommend. I'm trying to think of any other ones, like Widowmakers I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of. But things like metabolite, basically pushing metabolites into the cell and then kind of having it as like an activation sets afterwards, I quite like. So like things, yeah, again, like myo, cluster, and drop sets tend to be the ones that I recommend. Next question. How would you design a program if I want to prioritize my delts? So you train 4 times a week. Okay, so you've got to look at the delts as in 3 heads. Number 1 is going to be the front delt, the medial delt or the side delt, and then the rear delt. To see like bigger delts, one thing that is heavily neglected is always going to be rear delt, because it kind of gives that massive, like that thick look to the frame. Front delts I wouldn't necessarily worry about too much, but if I was to program you with a priority to kind of delts, it would probably be an upper lower split, and maybe an upper lower upper lower, and at the start of the lower sessions I would do some rear delt work, and at the start of your upper sessions, if your delts are actually weak, I would actually program you delt work first. That's basically how I would work around it. A lot of these is a lot of like weak area training, everyone wants to pour like a lot of volume in. So I like the question of like, how would you design a program? Because it kind of, if you're saying you have like weak delts, right, you want to prioritize them, then this is actually the way to go about it. Would actually be programming situation, and also like exercise selection, so picking stuff that's actually favorable to you, and that has a kind of a great SFR. Things like, obviously, you want to be prioritizing lat raises. With like rear delt work, you probably want to be prioritizing like face pulls, flies, machine flies, dumbbell kind of rear delt rows, things like this, to give that kind of whole kind of structure, whole frame. But yeah, I would basically place them at the start of the workout, like when you're very kind of fresh, and then I'd basically do like an upper lower split. So I'd have like side delt at the start of the upper, and then I'd do rear delt, and then I'd do side delt at the start of the upper, then I'll do start of the lower, do the rear delt, and then go from there, and then work myself up in terms of like volume, etc. If I need more, basically, I'll add it in for you. So yeah, that's basically how I'd run that. So favorite rear delt movement. I feel like there's a lot of like shoulder questions. Favorite rear delt movement or movements. I'm not the biggest fan of face pulls, to be honest, but they're in my program. There's a certain element of sometimes your preference just doesn't suit optimality, right? So like I always play to clients' preferences, right? So like if they really want something in, it's going to be in their program. However, at some level, something has to give in order to grow. For instance, like I don't really like face pulls, but like they grow my delt, like they grow my rear delts. I can't deny that. I just don't feel it that much. But there's no denying when they're out, then I noticeably see my rear delts aren't as kind of full, aren't as big. So yeah, there's a lot of like kind of anecdote to kind of take away from that. So my favorite movements will be something like a cuffed rear delt fly. I also like high rows. They're very cool. So like cable high rows. And then yeah, I mean, again, like my favorite ones to actually grow my rear delts, which is a different conversation, is going to be face pulls, unfortunately. That's just going to be kind of standing face pulls rather than you can kind of brace it with a chair at some level, but I prefer standing just because there's less of a pain in the ass for me. I also like cuffed face pulls as well. I tend to find with like most rope exercises, the little bit at the end, just it really kind of hurts my handies. But yeah, it hurts my hands. So basically, like, I'm not really working my rear delt to failure, because the only thing that's given out, or the thing that's given out first, is like the pain to my hands. So yeah, they tend to be my favorite rear delt movements. Update on the shoulder, because I had a little niggle in my front delt. Since the deload, felt absolutely perfect. No niggles at all, which is very odd. I'm actually very glad I stopped the mesocycle short. And basically all I've done is just moved a exercise which was a hammer strength chest press, which is like a decline variation, and all I've done is swap it for a cable chest press. And it seems to have kind of cracked the code. Sometimes we are very lucky, and sometimes we have kind of gone too far with it, right? So yeah, I theorize my last mesocycle, I just had too much pressing in. I was working too close to failure with the pressing and things like this. So it's a lesson learned. It's kind of a good lesson as well, because nothing really happened, which is good. But nothing really happened. So basically, I know my upper echelon of where I need to be, and I can just work underneath that. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but at the same time, I wouldn't have changed it. Again, it wasn't like a massive niggle. I call it a niggle, but like us bodybuilders think that like tiny little things going wrong, we kind of notice it a little bit more. Whereas it's like, I was actually speaking to my client Ryan the other day, and we were speaking about like everyday humans just wouldn't know that they've got a niggle, if that makes sense. They'll just be walking along the road and they kind of, something's happening in their shoulder, they wouldn't notice it. They're like, oh, it's just everyday life and pains and stuff, right? Whereas we're like, fuck, what the fuck is this? We need to get it sorted, right? And that's kind of the difference between like regular folk and bodybuilding. But we're very kind of aware of our situation, which in my opinion is good. Next question: biggest regret with training? Yeah, not too much. The only kind of real regret I have with bodybuilding is probably not getting a coach when I was very early on in my lifting career, because I would have saved about 5, 6, 7 years of inefficient training. And that sounds really like cliche coming from a coach, right? But I would have picked up a coach very early on in my lifting career, because I would have, if I could basically train very similar to what I do now, back then, I would have gained a fucking ton of muscle, which I kind of regret, because I'm almost paying for that further down the line. It does mean that I'm making gains like even now, which is quite cool considering I'm like 12 to 13 years into my lifting career. But yeah, like imagine how much I would have made if I knew what I knew now, which is kind of, it's not really a regret, but like a coach would tell you, do this, and you'll be like, oh, okay, cool. So yeah, and then this brings on to another question, or a very similar question. They all kind of link actually. They were actually just they were just random questions. But are you taking on another coach this year? I wonder if this is for like prep, or whether I'm taking on another coach for my business. Maybe I'll answer both. I probably will pick up a coach for prep, just because it takes that stress away from me. At some level, I really want to kind of do it by myself and just see what I can do. I know that at a certain level, I'm just going to be a warrior, right? I'll just worry a lot. So yeah, it kind of takes all the stress, etc., away from me if I do have a coach. But it's also quite cool just to see how much I know, if that makes sense. See how much I know myself, etc. By the way, this is 2 sessions. This isn't one session. I'm not going from legs to a push session. This is just B-roll. But yeah, it's 2 sessions. The next exercise I was very happy with. This is actually a personal best, a fucking massive one as well. I really want 3 plates on this by the end of the off season. My original goal was 2, and then we hit 2 like here. But yeah, very happy with this set here in particular. And then for the business, it's probably a very high likelihood, especially with the workload at the minute, that we'll probably have another coach on the business sooner rather than later, which would be very cool, because I'd love to, like, I want to be like, imagine, or for me, the goal would be like 3DMJ. They just have like multiple coaches at a fucking high level, who are evidence based, but they also take like anecdote along with it. That would be like a really cool goal of mine. So yeah. Would you recommend blood tests as a natural bodybuilder? Only if something's wrong. That's kind of a little bit bad. But as I said to you like earlier on, in terms of like the shoulder, we're very good at noticing what's happening with our body. Like again, the everyday folk who will be walking down the street won't notice like the fatigue and stuff. It's just like a byproduct of like everyday life. Whereas we're like, this doesn't feel like me. I normally feel like this. And that's when we should have a blood test, right? But we're not. And again, like if you're noticing like signs of having low test, then yeah, like blood test away. So yeah, that's what I basically do with clients. If I can see stuff isn't happening, like scale weight isn't doing what I think it will do, like it just doesn't make sense. They feel very, very lethargic. They're deloading every 2 weeks. Then I'm like, dude, we'll just get a blood test, and then we'll check bloods. And then 9 times out of 10, we actually did that with another client of mine, Fraser. We actually did that very recently, or about 2 or 3 weeks ago, about a week ago, about a month, 2 or 3 months ago. We found out, or we kind of had the bloods back, and we've adjusted, and he's fine now, which is cool. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring this closer because I swear I need glasses. Next question. So do you train with RAR or failure? Which camp are you in? I'm in no camp. I am in the Rainer trainer camp. That sounds very like cliche, but I train with both. Like some of my sets I'll take to failure, some of my sets I'll train with RAR. There's not really a lot that I'll take with kind of reps in reserve. They'll like mainly compounds are like 1 or 2 RAR. The rest of it's going to be to failure. So yeah, I'm not in any camp. I hate this like this versus that situation in the fitness industry. Again, I think a lot of it is down to personality types. So some people really love training to RAR, some people don't, and you just have to play to that. And whichever one you're going to consistently do for the most amount of time, you're probably going to win. You're probably going to maximize, right? You got to think that if you hate training to failure, which one are you? If I tell you to train to failure, what are you gonna do? You're gonna quit. So you train with RAR. So yeah, I think it's a personality type. Which camp am I in? Neither. Okay, next question. I have a client who has an eating disorder. How would you work around this? I wouldn't take them on. Quite simply, I would not take them on. If they have a history of eating disorder, and you don't know how to deal with it. There's a certain situations where you can probably work around a bad relationship with food. A bad relationship with food versus an eating disorder is 2 completely different things. I could probably work around someone who has a bad relationship with food, considering I can go through their like history, and it will likely be I've been in a deficit for 3 years. There you go, take you out of a deficit, and then get you onto someone sort of like structured meal plan with etc. etc. But if they point blank have been diagnosed with an eating disorder, you are not well equipped to deal with it. So don't deal with it. Pass it off to a professional. Last question. Do you think there is a max time to rest in between sets? For hypertrophy, yes. I think that if you're probably looking at like north of 3 minutes per set, it's probably a little bit too long. That's not to say like a cuff lat raise into an incline press. If you rest 3 minutes in between that's obviously fine. You've got setup time, etc. If you're going from incline press to incline press, that's when I'd say this is probably too long. You can have too little, and this kind of goes into or falls into the bracket of like it depends as an online coach, because essentially like, say for example, a calf raise versus an incline press. This is why I don't give my clients exact rest times. Number one, it's an individual, but number two, like again, if I just said right, rest 2 minutes in between each set, like calf raises, do you need 2 minutes to rest really on a calf raise? You don't do. Do you need 2 minutes rest on hack squat? Like after a hack squat, probably, right? So there's like this kind of, it depends the area with rest times. But also like if I get client A and client B, the incline press for client A could be 2 minutes. Client B could be 1 minute, right? Again, there's just so many nooks and crannies. You got to think that person A could be weaker, person B could be stronger. Person A is 110 pounds, person B is 300 pounds. Which one needs more rest? Person B, right? So yeah, very, very nuanced, but I do think generally 5 minutes is probably like three plus minutes I would question. 5 minutes for me is like, no, you don't need that long, even if you're taking it to failure. Anyway,